Hey there, my name is Jimmy Cannon, and this is week one, the reflection on what we've talked about and what we've learned. Little preface to this is that I've taken this course once before. I basically finished 2 weeks of it before a lot of crazy stuff happened in my personal life, and I ended up almost dropping out and giving up on my degree and all kinds of stuff. So I'm a little bit more familiar with the material than I would have been if I had read this, as a first time getting into it. But I still have a few things I want to talk about. Like last time I took this course, I love reading about the conquests of Mesoamerica. Not because I think it's great what happened. I think that it's terrible what happened. But I think that there's a lot about bad things that have happened in history that we need to appreciate more, because we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for some of those things that happened. So just for a second, I want you to just imagine that you go and you hop in your car. You decide that you want to go to New York City. And so you leave here from Pinellas County or Lakeland or wherever you are. You leave and you just start driving, right? You're expecting to arrive in New York in about 20 hours or so. So 20 hours passes, you get out of your car, and you go and you start talking to the people at the gas station. You go to the gas station and you say, hey, New York's pretty crazy. It's different than I expected. And these people are all looking at you like you're absolutely insane. Before one person finally approaches and said, dude, let me tell you something. You're in Kansas right now. 20 hours in the wrong direction is what you've done. And so this is basically how the first landings that we have recorded from the Spanish take place. Christopher Columbus arrives on the shores and starts talking to the native people. Sorry about that. And he's expecting to meet Indians, from India. He was trying to get to India. So these Native Americans who still have tan skin, they're, similar regions as far as where the equator is, right? So to him, they look a lot alike. So obviously it takes him a while to realize something's wrong. But he finds that he discovered a new civilization. So he leaves his men, some of his men, with these people, goes back to Spain, planning to return shortly. Lo and behold, he comes back, and they're dead. Now, Christopher Columbus is an interesting topic on his own. A lot of people today hate Christopher Columbus, and I said this the last time I reflected. It's like it's the cool thing these days to hate Christopher Columbus. So when Columbus Day comes around, everybody's up in arms and angry and all kinds of crazy stuff. But the bottom line is that Christopher Columbus was not into genocide. And in the video presentation, it talks about how it wouldn't make sense for Christopher Columbus to be into genocide because he was into trade. He was into making money, trading goods and stuff like that. And there's a lot of things that the Mesoamericans had to offer somebody like Christopher Columbus, so it doesn't make much sense that he was into genocide. Later down the road, he talks about how God had put it on his heart to spread Christianity and to Christianize those people. And I think that at that point, we're talking about the time where Cortez has already seen human sacrifice in the Aztec Empire, I believe it was. And so they used this human sacrifice. It's like the witch hunts in Europe. They were scared. They didn't understand. And human sacrifice is evil. So they decided to use that to justify slaughtering countless Mesoamericans. And one of the craziest things to me, one of the crazy stories, and again, something I talked about last time I posted a video response, was the founding of Mexico City. Then the Spanish moved north, and what we all know as Sky City was a Pueblo settlement built into the side of a mountain. Beautiful. A lot of people would say protected. They go in there and they slaughter 50% of the population. After the 50% is dead, they take the remaining survivors, and women and children become slaves. And of every man that they keep, they chop off one of his feet so that he can't run away. And these people are all taken and put into slavery, those who don't convert. So they're basically forced into marriages, forced to work in environments they don't know and they're not familiar with, taken out of what is their native situation and placed in like the big city. If you were to go right now to Belize, out into the mountain regions and talk to some of those Chichi people, I don't know how to pronounce what they actually are, but the remainders of the Mayan civilization. Take some of them out of their environment, out of their home, put them in New York City, and expect them to do hard work. well, your results would be mixed. So a lot of the people struggled, um, and out of this was kind of birthed what is known as the Black Legend. Now, the Black Legend is something that the British, the Dutch, other Europeans, they used this to motivate the colonization of the New World. So the Dutch arriving up north, the British arriving in at Roanoke and Jamestown, and using all these things to motivate their moves was this Black Legend of the terrible atrocities that these Catholics, these people who are so focused on money and spreading like a disease. So at the time, the Protestants then decided to start moving in as well. Something else that was interesting to me was the Jamestown story. I love the Jamestown story. It's a story of desperation and survival. There were countless things that happened. So the first major winter, let's talk about that first. The first major winter was extremely, extremely difficult. The people were waiting for a shipment to arrive of supplies that were going to get them through the winter, and that never comes. So the people don't get the supplies they need, they don't get the food that they're expecting, or any of the things that they were expecting. So they were completely unprepared when winter arrives, and it's one of the worst winters they've ever experienced. People are dying left and right. There's no food. People go out to hunt. They can't find animals. They can't catch any animals. So slowly, over time, people are starving to death to the point where they're boiling shoe leather, boiling saddles, eating their shoes. I mean, eating their livestock. Have you ever had to eat horse? I've never had to eat horse. Pray to God I never have to eat horse. I know it's still in Mongolia, I think, but I never want to go out and eat Sally the horse that I used to pull my tractor through my fields. It's one of those crazy things where people were desperate. There was even a case of, in I think it was 2012. I had the year written down, but I don't have it there anymore. But there was a young girl excavated, and they found that this young girl had been cannibalized. And it's kind of the story. People would die, they'd put them in the ground. A couple days later, starvation hits, they dig them back up, they cook them and eat them. Absolute desperate times and horrible things that happened, but they were done out of survival. Otherwise, there would be no people to come back to. So in the spring, when other people arrived, they found 60 survivors in the town of Jamestown, which is absolutely crazy to me. Now, another thing about Jamestown that's interesting, the John Smith story. Now, this is another story I absolutely love. The John Smith story, the real one, not the Pocahontas version, is where John Smith comes over here, right? They're using indentured servitude and all other kinds of methods to get the rich to bring their business over, because tobacco farms and all kinds of crazy things were really starting to hey, there's a lot of good crops over here. There's a lot of good land over here. Come and invest. We need people. So they bring these rich over, and it really doesn't work out like they expect it to. There was this caste system of classes in Britain that just did not work over here in the Americas. John Smith basically took up leadership, and he said that if you don't work, then you won't eat. So he was basically forcing these rich men who have never lifted a finger, no calluses on their hands, never worked for anything in their lives, and making them work. Otherwise, they don't eat. So I think that what happened in Jamestown really helped to define the America that we have come to know today and love. Is that we don't have a really strong class system. We talk about the upper, middle, and lower class, but it's based on income. In Britain, there are so many more things that are wrapped into the class system and the caste system. So the multicultural melting pot of making people work for what they have helped to define our nation, I think. Now, another thing that's interesting, Dutch expansion up in the north, how they moved across with breeding into the other the native culture there, which was pretty crazy. Taking them as wives and intermarrying and having children that are of mixed race. A lot of that stuff that a lot of people wouldn't even dream of. It was an atrocity. The natives were pagans. They were dirty. They were unclean. They weren't Christians. A lot of them. Um, Slowly, the people were being converted, sure, but the Dutch approach was, I think, much more effective and less violent than other options. Not saying it was completely without violence. We're talking about the 15, 16, 1700s. It was a very violent time, of course, but I think the Dutch settlements were significantly less violent than the British, and especially less violent than the Catholic Spanish movements through Mesoamerica up into the North Americas. And I think that a lot of that is what we have to thank for, again, the multicultural melting pot that we're able to enjoy as Americans. The fact that we can have neighbors of all different classes, colors, and professions, and we all seem to get along pretty well. One last thing I wanted to mention was the smallpox point. Again, something I touched in a previous video, but I think it bears repeating, is that I always thought that the Europeans brought smallpox over. However, that's not the case. Smallpox has kind of always been a thing, and it affected the natives. When the Dutch arrived, this group of natives, where they arrived, I believe it was like the Manhattan Island area, all that, 95% of their population had been wiped out by one of the worst smallpox epidemics they had ever seen. So the Dutch essentially was a blessing to this remaining 5%, this very small population of Native Americans. So they were eager and looking forward to a friendship with the Dutch, which might have actually helped it be the less violent expansion that I really like. So again, this week we covered so many different topics that I absolutely adore about American history. I'm excited to look towards next week and the coming weeks, where I know less and less, because I'm excited, especially into like week 3 and 4 of this class. I'm really excited to continue to expand my knowledge on American history, because I do love our country. So I pray that you guys are blessed through this course as well. Thank you, Professor, for everything that you're doing. Be blessed and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week.